Well, it's been quite a week. Here in Japan, socially, on the news, everywhere. I don't know what's going on.
Well, it finally stopped raining.
Yeah, here in Japan, anyway.
We got out of the rainy season, and now it's just hot. It was pushing up to 38 degrees today, almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
I was out in that. I kind of liked it. I got my towel, like Douglas Adams in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy says I have to have, so always safe.
Yeah, we've got a lot of heat to come. It's going to be a long, hot summer. Hopefully we'll have a lot of hot music to enjoy over the season. This week we've got some good new music to introduce to you. Before we get into this week's program, though, a few thanks from last week. We want to thank the Zimlinsky Quartet.
Yeah.
For sharing our episode from last week. Be sure to check out their recording, Piano Quintets. They had a pianist with them on that recording, Bela Bartok and Ernst von Dofnany. Evil Penguin Classic label, and I have to say, after we kind of joked about them last week, the Evil Penguin is not so evil. They did send us the recording information after all.
That's right, they did.
Someone was working remotely or something, so thanks, Evil Penguin.
Thank you, Evil Penguin. You're still evil in our hearts, though. I mean that as a compliment. I hope you take that the right way.
And also a big thanks to organist Brian Ho for sharing our episode and expressing his continued enthusiasm for the podcast. Definitely check out his new release on Cellar Music Bridges. That's one you'll want for your CD collection as well. Go back to last week's episode and listen to that if you haven't. And why not order it from Cellar Music's Bandcamp page? If you like organ trios like we do, you definitely want to hear that release. And we're here this week on Adult Music, episode 174. I'm your co-host, Russ.
And I'm your co-host, Mike.
Bringing you 6 recordings pretty much every week.
How do we do it? Even we don't know. It just happens.
That's right. Last week we crossed over the 1,000 recordings discussed on the podcast line. So we're going to start with 1,001 this week.
Wow. So we hit it exactly 1,000 with the last recording that we heard. Wow.
That's right. Brian Ho was number 1,000. Starting on the next 1,000 in this episode. In the description for this episode, as always, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all the music we're going to talk about. Also, at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality, streaming music from France. You can listen to the podcast on Deezer as well if you want to get everything in one place. And if the description for the episode is hard to read or the links are jumbled up on whatever app or platform you listen to us on, you can always come over to our host site. That's Podbean, Podbean.com. Everything is easy to follow there. If you enjoy the podcast, follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us. Tell a music-loving friend. Help us grow our audience. If you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that helps us get listed in the music category recommendations. Another way that we can get new listeners. Come on over and follow us on our Facebook page as well to get extra info and new releases throughout the week. I'm always putting up a few in between episodes for you to check out. You can leave a message or comment there. See our interaction with the artists. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We're going to play samples of the recordings we're going to discuss this evening as well. And this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. And now we're ready to jump into the music.
All right. Recording number 1001, and it's a good one. So we're off to a really amazing start. I really like this one. This is music by Mozart and our favorite Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. They were contemporaries. Young and Foolish is the name of the album. Great title.
Yeah.
And this features the pianist Alexander Melnikov on the forte piano, which is the name they've given to the early piano from the Beethoven era and slightly before that. And Céline Frisch plays the harpsichord. And the ensemble is called Café Zimmermann, Pablo Valetti, violin and direction. And it's on the Alpha label. And this was released June 21st. Now, I'm familiar with Café Zimmermann from many previous recordings, and I have a box set of them. It's like a 15 CD box set.
Wow.
And what a treasure trove it is. So I'm really happy to see that they're still recording new music, and this one is just as interesting as those are. The booklet mentions that it might seem unusual to pair Mozart's music with CPE Bach's, but I have to say, I don't think so. I've been noticing the similarities between the two for a long time. Mozart was a great admirer of CPE Bach. They were friends, and Mozart has some of CPE Bach's techniques in his works as well, though he uses them in a different way. It makes them a little more quirky. CPE Bach being especially quirky when he uses his techniques in his music. Mozart also, he was a big fan of the Bach family in general. He also liked Johann Christian, was probably his favorite composer of the Bach children that he was acquainted with. Now, I have to say, first of all, the booklet seems to have mistaken who's playing piano and harpsichord on what tracks. So I'm going to try to fix this. Unless I'm not hearing like something on certain tracks. It seems like Céline Frisch is credited with playing the piano at certain points, but I think she plays the harpsichord throughout. She's not on the piano. And Alexander Melnikov is always on the forte piano on the tracks that he appears on. So I'll mention that as it comes up. Annoyingly, too, the recording dates of these works are not included in the booklet. And that leads me to believe that these may have been recorded over a long period of time, and possibly long ago. There's no way of knowing, really. I kind of wish they had put this in, even if it's like 10 years ago. It wouldn't matter. I would still want to, know where these recordings fall in Café Zimmermann's output. Anyway, the recording was released on June 21st. These works haven't been released before by Café Zimmermann. I'm a big fan of the ensemble, so I'm happy to be listening to this. So we have a little mystery as to what the recording dates were for these. All right, now the first three tracks are a work by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, his Symphony in D Major, Wattquen 183/1, H663, composed in 1778. Now, it says there's a keyboard instrument in this work, and there might be faintly somewhere, but I don't hear it. I think this is just strings. Did you hear any keyboards in this?
Not in my notes, no.
Yeah, I didn't hear any, so just the Café Zimmermann ensemble playing this. Anyway, let's get into it. It's fantastic. Track 1. First movement, Allegro di molto. The key of this movement is unclear for a long time. Where are we going? It's kind of like harmonic bumper cars here. We don't, we're going one way and then we just kind of suddenly swerve another way and that sort of thing until the music finally figures out where it wants to be. This is a familiar work to listeners of this podcast. We've talked about this before. And the beginning sort of presages the main section of Mozart's Prague Symphony. Now, if you remember the Prague Symphony, how it starts with this like single note that starts slowly pulsing and then it becomes this really lovely sort of delightful melody in that work, that happens here as well. And I think this is the earlier work. In fact, it is the earlier work. The piece is played with a bit of humor, and I like that. So Café Zimmermann has their interpretation in the right place, and I expected that. And I like the bassoon line at the 1 minute mark. So in the sample, I'm going to make sure that that gets in. I'm going to start this sample from about 50 seconds in, and let's hear that part. And Bach isn't going to allow us that cadence, is he? That seems like an odd sample, really, but I really wanted you to hear the characterization of all the wind instruments. They all stand out, not just because of their tones, but because of the way they shape their individual phrases. They're very individual, and this is characteristic of Café Zimmermann's approach, and I really love it. It sort of reminds me of the early days of period instrument recordings, where all the instruments really stood out. Café Zimmermann is really known for their bold approach, and you're hearing that a bit here. By the way, the bassoon, if you're not familiar, that would be the bass voice in the wind, so you have to be familiar with hearing the bass in order to pick that out. So the recording is on the harsh side. There are no burnished tones here. This is not a Rembrandt painting of a recording. It's rather rougher. It really leaps out at you with a raw in-your-face sound, and I rather liked that. It's exciting. It's on the order of what turned me on to period instrument performances when I was in college. A lot is made of the instrumentation. The sudden harmonic changes aren't thrown into contrast, but nevertheless come across as an element of the whole. This is one of those rare recordings of a CPE Bach work that puts across charm as well as his brusque sense of humor. It finds a line and holds it together well. I also enjoyed the way the sudden slamming on of the brakes was taken right before the end of the movement. The second movement, Largo, has an elegant melody, but it's not played elegantly here, and purposely so. The approach is intriguing. Let's hear the opening of this movement. Now, certainly that melody could be smoothed out in the performance, but I rather like it this way. It seems really unique. The melody is well shaped, but the in-your-face quality that I previously mentioned sort of takes its potential demureness away. The movement is pleasant and very brief at just under 2 minutes. Then we get to the third and final movement, a presto. There are bold strings in this, and there's a mysterious passage just before the music starts up boldly again. This happens several times in the movement. Let me see if I can isolate one of those. This is the third movement, about 40 seconds in. Yeah, I wanted to get that quiet bit in there. What was that? It was almost like there's this wild chase, you know, in like a cartoon where you have like the coyote chasing the roadrunner, and then they suddenly have to stop because a family of ducks is crossing the road or something like that. You know, it's just this sudden change of character. It pretty much proceeds like this, with the chase finally bringing us to the end after a sudden, unexpected pause. It's a successful performance, though unusual, and it rather lifted me up. I really enjoyed this. Tracks 4 through 6 are also by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. It's his concerto for harpsichord and forte piano in E-flat major. This features both Céline Frisch on the harpsichord and Alexander Melnikov on the forte piano. And this is a new work for me. I haven't heard this before. Track 4 is the first movement, Allegro di molto. This opens with a cheerful, lively theme, and the second theme has wind instruments playing in a slightly wobbly way. Again, intentionally. This is the intentional part of the performance. It makes the ear take notice. At 1 minute and 5 seconds in, the two soloists come in, and I'd like to sample the lead up to that and their simultaneous entry, because the sound of the forte piano and harpsichord together is really magical here, and I'd like to isolate that. So let's hear a bit of this. It's really nice having those two timbres together. It really makes the ear take notice and in a really enjoyable way. The soloists both play pleasantly, and I want to also say the sound of both instruments is rather quiet on the recording, so this is a pretty realistic balance that we would hear in the concert hall if we were to hear these two instruments playing with an ensemble. There's a slight edge to the string and wind playing, in character for Café Zimmermann. The tempo is on the fast side and gives us a bit more of a lift when we hear it. There are occasional sudden key changes made by a sudden accented bass note. Both soloists play lightly and with a degree of athleticism. The movement is fun to listen to in this exuberant performance. That's a word I'm going to use a lot, I think, in this performance. Exuberant. Track 5, the second movement, Larghetto. The opening here comes across more on the elegant side, but there are those intrusive bass notes that suddenly change the harmony. The rhythm has a pulsing quality to it, which is brought out by the ensemble. At 1 minute and 5 seconds, the forte piano comes in alone. Then the harpsichord completes its phrase. It's really nice. The trading of the melodic line between the instruments continues and comes across as genial. And I'd like to sample that entry, so we're going to start this sample about 1 minute into the movement. Now, if you're going to stream this, you'll notice that the forte piano is panned a bit to the right and the harpsichord a bit to the left, so you can easily pull them out that way, as well as by timbre. We, of course, are recording in mono, so that anybody who may have only one earphone stuck in their ear can hear the whole piece. So go to the streaming for that. It's really nice. At 2 minutes and 50 seconds, there's a minor section that remains elegant and goes quickly back to the major. Despite the andante tempo, Café Zimmermann keep up the energy throughout. Another lovely false cadence sets up the final cadence. Track 9, Presto, and the Presto has a rushing theme. I'm going to start this right from the beginning. The theme is taken with a slight aggression, but it's lighthearted in its musicality. The fortepiano comes in with the first theme, the harpsichord then comes in with the theme once the orchestra finishes repeating it again, and we heard that in the sample. That constantly advancing four-note motif heard as the theme at the beginning is frequent and insistent and continues to the end. Now in tracks 7 through 9, we move on to Mozart, his Divertimento in F major, Köchel 138 from 1772. So Mozart was pretty young when he wrote this. He's still a teenager. I think he's around 16 years old. There are 3 of these divertimenti that were composed in Salzburg, where Mozart was born. This is the third of them. It's Gebrauchsmusik. Light, entertaining, not terribly difficult to perform. And if you remember last week, we talked about Christopher Rouse, who wanted to write his bassoon concerto just for enjoyment, has no really deep artistic messages in it. He's really emulating works like this, I think, when he did that. Track 7 is the first movement, Molto Allegro, and there's a pretty strong attack to the opening, and the string tone is right up front in this recording. Let's get a sample of that. Some nice swerving harmonies there into new keys at the end of that. I want to mention, the notes say that Alexander Melnikov is playing the forte piano on this track, and I could swear that I hear him very far in the background underlining some of the harmony, but I'm not really sure. It's mostly the strings, and they're right up front. It's a real lift to the rhythm in this movement. Track 8 is the second movement, Andante, and the Andante has a gentle pulse to it and a characteristically lovely melody. Here the Café Zimmermann play with a certain elegance, but maintain their upfront quality. The false cadences in this work are subtle, and let me sample one of those false cadences for you. I'm a big fan of the false cadence. In fact, that's one of the things I think that the Adult Music Podcast really loves is the false cadence, a well-placed false cadence. And again, behind the orchestra, you can faintly hear the forte piano just rolling the chords. He's not in the spotlight at all. I guess it just adds extra texture. At the Andante tempo, Café Zimmermann keep up the energy throughout. Another lovely false cadence sets up the final cadence. As we heard there, I hope you caught that false cadence before the big cadence about 20 seconds in to that sample. Track 9, the third and final movement, Presto. This has a rushing theme. Let's hear it. A few nice false cadences in there too, but they go by pretty quickly. Boy, you just can't take the charm out of Mozart's writing, can you? There are high spirits all around in this brief movement of just over 2 minutes, and you can hear the forte piano peeking out of the texture at times. But it's really there just for extra texture. That would be Alexander Melnikov. Speaking of him, he's the soloist in the Piano Concerto number 17 in G major by Mozart, which we hear in tracks 10 through 12. Track 10, the Allegro, has the winds really standing out, as in the CPE Bach works, due to the thickness of their sound here. Each of them has a distinctive sound different from what we're used to. We usually hear them blending together. And I just love this when they don't really blend, but you can hear the individual character of each one. The piece has a good tempo and flow to it. There's a great false cadence at around the 1 minute and 30 second mark, and we hear a bit of the forte piano in this section in the accompaniment. At 2 minutes and 10 seconds, the forte piano enters with its solo line. I'm going to sample that. So this is about 2 minutes and 10 seconds into the work. And there I am fading on another very appealing melody. You just can't get away from them. So the bass is played staccato by the piano, giving a feeling of speed and urgency to the rhythm. Melnikov provides some surprising staccato and ritardando effects to the line where we usually don't hear them, and it all comes up sounding appealing, making the work sound fresh. The orchestra lightens suitably for the forte piano's light sound. Again, the playing comes across with high spirits. I'm guessing this is Pablo Valetti setting the tempos, and his sense of timing is exquisite. The piano gets its cadenza at 9 minutes and 22 seconds and varies the speed quite a bit between phrases. Track 11, the middle slow movement marked Andante, is on the fast side of Andante, but it still has a nice flow to it. The woodwinds get the melodic section before the piano comes in, And the piano is in with a delicate line at 1 minute and 50 seconds, so let's hear that. We get some dark, stormy emotions there that gradually subside. Excellent writing by Mozart there, and well put across by the soloist. The orchestra raises the ante with some loud, minor chords, and the fortepiano responds in similar fashion. The lighter sections, such as that at around the 4 minute and 30-second mark, are played with a ghostly quality here. In the 7th minute, there's a brief cadenza to the fortepiano, and it starts softly and moves in a very delicate, soft line, bursting out of it with a loud chord and a sudden minor shift, which it then works its way out of with some bold chords and an ambiguously harmonized downward arpeggio. It then makes its way back to a cadence. There's some great tone on the brass toward the end of the movement. Track 12, the final movement and the final track on the album, is marked Allegretto. It's got a cheerful opening theme in the orchestra, sounding like a country dance. The fortepiano doesn't simply repeat the theme when it enters, but goes off on a new, answering melody. The movement continues as a set of variations on the opening theme, with the winds always enchanting when they appear. And that's really true throughout this album. I really loved hearing the winds every time they appeared on this album. The variations range from virtuosity from the piano to complete mood changes into softer, more modest settings. Café Zimmermann's lively pace seems to be bringing the best out of Melnikov, who responds with vivacious playing in the faster sections. Here's an example. And I hope you're noticing, along with the fantastic forte piano playing, the great wind instrument sounds. The movement and album end in high spirits with an exultant rush to the final cadence. So I've heard quite a few Café Zimmermann recordings over the years. As I've said, I have a box set of their recordings, and the performances are never straightforward. They're always high-spirited, and will go for the harsh and surprising over the decorous and elegant almost every time. They do go for contrast, though, when they don't do that. This recording is no different. It's got a lot of surprises, and Pablo Valetti sets such spirited tempos that these performances can only appeal. I've heard the Café Zimmermann set tempos that were too fast in the past, but not here. They're all perfectly judged, and on the fast side. Both soloists play with a lot of character as well. The ensemble inspires that. It's the sort of album that reminds me of what I found so appealing about period instrument performances when I heard them in college. It makes the music come up as fresh, with a cheekiness underneath the polite exterior. I really loved this album. Now, I realize not all people will. There are some people who want that elegant blend of sounds and maybe slower tempos. Well, this is not for you, but this is for me and people who think like me. This is such an appealing, fun album that I urge you to hear it, no matter what your opinions about how this music should be performed is.
I found it to be a very enjoyable recording, too. Pairing of CPE, Bach, and Mozart makes a nice connection in my mind that I hadn't thought about before in some of the techniques used in their compositions. Overall, I like the timbral qualities of this ensemble. The strings don't have this kind of sheen to them, but they have more of an organic, rounded tonal quality. The interpretations are enthusiastic with lots of contrasts, very energetic spots, and then more lyrical sections. But the mood has an overall playful impression, as suggested by the title. I really enjoyed hearing the harpsichord and forte piano together, which we don't get to hear very often like that. And as you mentioned, they are rather quiet compared to the ensemble, which is very realistic in the level of sound they would put out. And the combination of interpretation and tone quality makes a unique recording. And it was fun from start to finish.
Yeah, I'll have to have this one. It's so good. And it's a great combination to hear CPE Bach and Mozart on the same album. All right, our next classical recording is Horn Trios by Brahms, Ligeti, Mozart, and Schumann. And the performers here are Martin Owen on the horn, Francesca Dego on the violin. We've heard her several times on this podcast. And Alessandro Taverna on piano. This is on the Chandos label, and it was released on June 7th. All right, let's just get started with the music. I chose this for the program because it really intrigued me. I was really interested to hear these horn trios. The first one is a very famous one by Johannes Brahms, his trio in E-flat major for piano, violin, and horn, Opus 40 from 1865. So he's pretty young when he wrote this. This work effectively created the medium of the horn trio. For German writers, the horn was the voice of the forests, those huge, shadowy, elemental spaces in which life-transforming encounters occur in German opera, poetry, and fairy tales. Yeah, think of Little Red Riding Hood or Hansel and Gretel. All those things happen in the forest. The first movement is Andante, moving to poco più animato. Brahms said that the gently strolling theme that opens this movement came to him while walking through woodland. And the movement could be said to illustrate the German word Waldensamkeit, the sense of solitude that comes uniquely in the depths of a forest. Well, not to me, so I guess it's a German thing. I just feel anxiety when I'm in the middle of a forest. I'd rather be on the beach. Anyway, you can think of this movement as the 19th century equivalent of wearing a virtual reality mask that puts you in the middle of a forest. You get the feelings of being deep in the forest without actually being there. So think of it like that. This starts sensitively in the violin, perhaps oversensitively, but it puts the mood across. The horn then plays the theme with its mellow tone, and the horn really is the important instrument in this particular work. Okay, so we get a sort of stately tempo. It's on the slow side. There's less flow to this than I would like. I've heard performances from the past that make this seem all of a piece, rather than cut into individual sections, and that's kind of the sense that I'm getting here. Only 2 minutes in, and I'm already having reservations about this performance. It seems a bit too precious to me, though I like the horn tone. The second theme at 2 minutes and 21 seconds has more energy to it. This highlighting of the individual sections makes the more rhythmically flowing change to the second theme very obvious. The development is quick, and a recapitulation begins with the horn call played by the horn, as opposed to the violin this time. At 5 minutes, a variation of a second theme is heard, and at 6 minutes and 13 seconds, we hear the horn play its opening theme again, but afterwards the music goes into a new harmonic territory in a coda section that eventually leads to the final chord. In the second movement scherzo, the horn is associated with hunting, and that's explored in this movement. We get the vigorous rhythm here, along with horn calls. Let's get that in our ear. The melodic contours of the horns stand out, but again, I'm not getting the sense of horses trotting that the rhythm seems to call for. Detail is admirably clear, but I feel like there's a lot more in this score that isn't coming across, like characterizations of certain sorts. And it's due mostly to the way the rhythm is taken. At 2 minutes and 36 seconds, the trio section starts, and again here, I'm not getting a satisfying sense of the flow of the music, especially from the piano, although he characterizes really well at other times. This sounds very matter-of-fact, very read from the score to me. Maybe it's just that I've gotten older interpretations in my head, but those older recordings really made this work come alive for me. The opening scherzo theme returns at 4 minutes and 40 seconds with its hunting calls. The rhythm and horn calls should, to my understanding of this piece, have more of a triumphant sense to it, more of a sense of happiness at riding in the woods. I'm not getting that here. Off the top of my head, I can't even recommend one of those older recordings. I can't remember what they were, and yet I have them in my CD collection in the back. I could just go and look. Anyway, track 3, Adagio Mesto, third movement. It's said to be composed as a memorial to Brahms' mother, who had died only a few months before he began work on this horn trio. Piano starts this quietly with a meditative feel. The horn and violin then come in with their unison line. The movement is played at an appropriate adagio speed, but again, this isn't happening for me. It comes across as prosaic rather than poetic. The gentleness of the opening is put across only by dynamics, and there's got to be more. Track 4, the finale, Allegro con brio. I like the vigorousness with which this movement sets off with. Let's hear it. And that is Alessandro Taverna on the piano, setting the tempo and the whole feel of the piece really well. It's got that horse-riding rhythmic quality that the second movement should also have, I think. With the B section of this rondo form movement, the ensemble loses focus again. There's a dramatic moment when the piano is hammering on a dissonant chord in the first minute that just sounds like the harmony got stuck. You can hear this again at 2 minutes and 34 seconds, and I'm going to pull that out. This is the 2 minute and 30 second mark. It was right at the beginning of that sample. The section at 3 minutes is pretty, which I just faded out of, with its light piano sound, but again, more could be made of this. Even the approach to the ending doesn't have much momentum. So I'm getting a little alarmed by these Brahms performances. We had a piano quartet a few weeks ago that I thought didn't really live up to its big-boned kind of feeling. And here, I'm not getting much characterization from this either. I'll have some more to say about that at the end, but for now, tracks 5 through 8, we have George Ligeti, his trio for violin, horn, and piano, and it's subtitled Hommage à Brahms, even though it sounds absolutely nothing like Brahms, but he does take certain characteristics out. This is from 1982. Track 5 is the first movement, Andante con tenerezza, and Ligeti starts here with a horn call, though it's introduced by the violin. It doesn't sound like something that would sound natural in the woods. Despite being an homage to Brahms, this sounds very 20th century. Let me sample the beginning. I'm not sure what the woodland creatures would do if they heard that horn call. The violin wistfully plays accompaniment as the horn gets the spotlight, playing in some odd harmony. It's rather intriguing. At about the 1 minute and 50-second mark, a new section starts with the piano introducing new lines in the horn. And at 2 minutes and 55 seconds, the piano begins another section with creeping harmonic patterns, the horn now playing with a mute. We get wavering sul ponticello lines in the violin, Ligeti often going for new modes of expression. The horn continues with its distant, muted tone. The horn has some distant horn calls in the 4th minute, rather matter-of-fact sounding as performed here, but I won't offer that as a criticism. It sounds appropriate. The horn is present in its full tone again just after the 5th minute. The piece sort of wanders. I won't criticize the ensemble here for not giving the movement a clearer sense of shape. It may have none, or that may be their intention. I have to hear other performances of this. Track 6, the second movement, Vivacissimo molto ritmico, has metrically complex rhythms discovered and developed by Bartók, and they dominate this increasingly crazed, dance-like second movement. The basic pattern is 8 rapid notes divided into a recurring 3+3+2, but the cross rhythms become more complicated as the movement goes on, as the horn introduces some of the weirder sounding higher partials of the harmonic series. This starts with pizzicati in the strings, the piano picks up the pattern, then starts a rising ostinato line over which it plays a more complex pattern. I'm struck by the complexity, but again, when you have rhythms like this, there can be a sense of excitement to it, and I'm not getting that here. It sounds very measured, a bit on the careful side. Let me give you a sample, and maybe you can hear what I'm talking about. This is from about 4 minutes and 45 seconds in, and we'll hear this to the end of the movement. All right, and that's not the end of the movement. There's a section after that very long pause. Track 7, the third movement, is Alla Marcia. The march is savage here, dislocating and offbeat. The opening line is disjointed, sort of like the sonic equivalent of splashes of paint on a canvas. Let's hear it. It sounds more like a deconstruction of a march, really. At 1 minute and 14 seconds, there's a sudden change of timbre to muted horn and violin, with the piano lightly playing patterns in the high end. It gets louder, and the movement suddenly ends. Then we go to the 8th track, the 4th movement, Lamento. It's very quiet, almost inaudible opening in the violin and horn. The piano eventually comes in with individual notes dripping onto the texture. The volume eventually builds up into something louder and more savage until it finally stops. There's a long pause in the 5th minute, and harmonics eventually emerge out of the silence on the violin as the piano drops some chords onto the space. The piece simply moves back to silence at its ending. Tracks 9 through 11, we get a rather interesting arrangement of Mozart's Quintet in E-flat major for horn, violin, 2 violas, and cello from 1782. This was arranged and edited for horn, violin, and piano by Ernst Naumann, who lived 1832 to 1910. He was Brahms's friend. He was a composer and arranger, and Mozart wrote his original quintet for the horn player and cheesemonger Joseph Leutgeb. Yeah, you get your normal job as a cheese seller, and they play the horn at night, I guess. I guess that was the way to live. He was an excellent horn player, apparently. Track 9 is the first movement, Allegro. I'm familiar with this piece, and it sounds really light in this version. It's at a faster tempo than the quintet version usually is, and it's pretty appealing. The horn takes a lot of the themes I have to say, it's interesting to hear like this, though I think I prefer the thicker textures of the original quintet. Anyway, let's give this a sample. Yeah, in this arrangement, the horn gets much more of the spotlight than it does in the original quintet version. The piano keeps the sound light. It's usually thicker in the quintet version. And I feel like the ensemble has a more genial quality in this work than they did in the previous two. Martin Owen on the horn especially sounds good here in his characterization of his lines, and he'd better because he has most of the spotlight. He actually sounds rather up front in the mix here. At around the 3-minute and 50-second mark, the development section starts after we've heard the opening section twice. It's brief at 4 minutes and 17 seconds, and we already seem to be back in the recapitulation, which repeats at 6 minutes and 17 seconds. Track 10 is the second movement Andante, and it's given a slow, dreamy tempo. The violin has the main line and takes it with a light tone. No sign of the horn at the opening. Owen comes in on the horn, repeating the theme at about the 49-second mark, but quickly goes off in a new direction. There's a repeat of the opening. After 3 minutes and 40 seconds, the violin, always leading in this movement, takes the music into the development section. The recap is back by the 4-minute and 40-second mark, and here the horn has more of a hush to its tone. The section comes to a pretty cadence in the 6th minute, and then continues into a repeat of the development and recapitulation. Track 11, the final movement, Rondo. It's an attractive Mozart rondo, played with the horn leading at first, then the violin and piano sounding rather thin comparatively. Repeat it. Let's hear it. Yeah, so very attractive. The B and C sections of the rondo movement have the horn still playing with relative athleticism, the violin and piano adding charming echoes of the horn's line. While this could all be more playful, it comes across well enough here, especially with the horn's impressive lines. The coda features some fugal entries starting at 3 minutes and 45 seconds, and the piece quickly reaches its final cadence afterwards. Track 12, the final track, is Robert Schumann's Duet, which is number 3 from his Fantasy-Stück Opus 88, originally for piano, violin, and cello, and here performed with the horn, taking the cello's line. This is a love duet for feminine violin and masculine cello, or in this case, horn, who is surely Clara and Robert, with piano providing a gently flowing accompaniment. The cello part is adapted for horn here. This is a brief, slowly flowing encore piece. The piano plays mostly arpeggiated harmony, which the horn and violin duet over. The horn stands out again, sounding like a creature from a different terrain. It's a meeting of unlike instruments here, but it works well. The charm of Schumann's writing comes across. I rather like the last 30 seconds, where the horn's line sinks to its lowest register. Owen gets a quiet but haunting tone here. Yeah, I think this would work better with the violin and cello duetting, since they sound of a piece. It kind of sounds like the violin is falling in love with someone from outer space here. The sounds are just so different. And that's the album. I was attracted to the program of the recording, and I've enjoyed Francesca Dego's performances in the past, particularly the Brahms and Busoni violin concertos recording we talked about on our March 11th episode just this year, which we called Sax Partners. That was episode 156. There are other of her recordings I didn't like much, like the Mozart piano quartets of August 28th last year, in episode 129, Metal Melodies. This album suffers from the same issues that the Mozart album had. The performance of the Brahms horn trio here is lacking in subtlety. The magic of the score simply doesn't come out in this performance, though it's well shaped and played. It doesn't take on any sort of spark. The Ligeti especially suffers, I thought. It lacks focus, and that's important here. Music like this needs a committed performance to put it across. The Mozart came across well. It had charm, though I rather like the original version of it better than this arrangement. The Schumann sounds fine too, and makes for a mysterious ending to the program. What I thought happened here is what I often see in football matches or soccer matches for Americans. It's possible to have three great players on the front line of a team, and they just don't communicate or sort of combine well together and wind up not scoring any goals. I feel like a musical equivalent of that may be happening here.
I was kind of happy to hear a horn trio. We haven't heard one in a long time. I thought the Brahms, as a work, it's got the most variety in it, and I kind of enjoyed the various sections in each movement of Brahms' writing. I always like Brahms that way, different moods and tones. The Ligeti, I'm not really sure about this work. It'll take me a few more listens and maybe some other performances to compare it to wrap my head around it. I will say it sounds really difficult in the horn part. I was noticing all the intervals in the lines. It sounds like a difficult piece to perform. As you said, the Mozart sounds a little bit thin in this arrangement of it, but the horn stands out more. And I haven't heard this in a while, but maybe I want to also hear the original quintet version of it to compare. But I did like the Schumann a lot. I found it to be a very flowing kind of performance and a really pretty melody. I did find the horn playing to be outstanding on the recording. My ear was mostly drawn to his horn playing, so.
He had a great tone.
Yeah.
I thought, yeah. And especially in the Mozart, I thought he really shined there. And he had the nice kind of forest horn in the Brahms, but I don't know. Somehow that just didn't
do it for you.
It didn't spark for me. I don't know. It was just kind of sounded like the poetry just wasn't there. It's a great work, though. Absolutely. Anyway. On to the next recording. I hate to leave them like that because I do like the three individual musicians. This didn't really speak to me. Anyway, our contemporary composer of the week, Arto Koskinen. He was Finnish, born in 1947. This is his album entitled Fuga Indiana. Now, please, when we see Indiana, it doesn't mean Indiana in the United States where Indianapolis is. He means like an Indian fugue from the country India, like raga type things. All right, so this is a very India-inspired album, and it's played by Joonas Ahonen on the piano. This is a solo piano album that's going to take on, modal Indian themes in a way. Although they were all composed by Koskinen here. This is on the Alpha label. It was released on June 7th. So with the music on this album, Koskinen is attempting a synthesis of Asian, European, and Afro-American traditions. Now, after hearing it, I have to say mostly Asian, because that's really mostly what I heard. Although I did hear, like, the European in the fugues.
There's a little bit of bluesiness to it in some spots, too.
At certain spots, that would be the Afro-American influence. The classical music of North India, the Western tradition of polyphonic composition, and Afro-American improvised music are its main sources. Koskinen thinks that the seeming incompatibility of these different types of music is only a surface phenomenon, and that at the deepest level they're fully commensurate, and that there is ultimately only one aesthetic, one great logic to beauty, which manifests itself in different but complementary forms in the music of various continents and cultural eras. He sees links between Western and Eastern music being formed by musical modes. Yeah, I would agree with that part, which all three forms listed above share. He goes into a long technical explanation of how he tried to accomplish this in the booklet note. I will not run that past you here. If you're really interested, you could download the booklet and read it for yourself.
I found it fascinating reading, actually.
Yeah, well, yeah, music people would, but I think
going from Jimi Hendrix and all kinds of other stuff, so.
Yeah, I think he also mentions, John Coltrane as well, right. And Indian music too. There's also an account of his studies in India in that book. There's no explanation of the genesis of the individual works, but the titles do give quite a bit away, so let's talk about that. Track 1 is a prelude written in 1987. This is a brief prelude at 2.5 minutes. It's spacious and relies on brief, meditative modal lines that seem to float there like dust hanging in space. The quick quivering figures seem to have no resting place, as is the case with musical modes. They don't really resolve to anything. There's a pretty interesting key change around the 1 minute and 25 second mark, and I'm going to isolate that part. I'm going to start this at 1 minute and 15 seconds and see if we can hear that. And you got those modes in your ear right away. And to me, they speak like Asian modes. It doesn't really sound like church modes, although they are as well. But I think it's just the context in this case. Then, after a quick dramatic outburst, the quick harmonically drifting figures return. It's rather a pretty piece, as you heard, and inconclusive at the end, I guess, as we should expect. Okay, all the rest of the pieces on the album were written between 1993 and 2000. Tracks 2 through 3 are Fantasia in Saranga. Sarang is a family of ragas, and I'm guessing this is the main basic one that he's dealing with. He seems to go for the more basic ragas in this when he sort of does his fantasias on them. Track 2 is marked Animato. It starts with similar figures to the prelude, all modal, all feeling like they have no resting place. The figures work as brief trills that suddenly decide to rise or fall a note. A fantasia really relies on the composer's imagination regarding form or formlessness. This one seems additive. It grows into new modal areas and again is rather pleasant to listen to. Actually, this entire album is pleasant to listen to. Track 3, the second movement, Presto con fuoco. This really works in the same way as the Animato, the previous movement, except that it's more active. I don't know how fuoco it is. Judge for yourself. I'm going to sample this from the 2-minute mark. Well, it's certainly rapid, and there's some pretty impressive piano playing going on that track. Figures are rapidly sprinkled out and seem to be emanating from vibrating trills. By the 2-minute and 50-second mark, the work reaches a very loud volume, sounding impressively solid. It then stops, the sound is allowed to fade, and then some modal lines pull us away from the rock face of sound that was built up. This is a technique that Koskinen is going to use in a few other pieces of this, where he'll build up this huge edifice of sound at a very loud volume to the point where the inside of the piano is rattling, and then he'll just suddenly pull it away like the rug is pulled from under us. Tracks 4 through 6, Fuga Indiana. This is the title track. The fourth track is the first movement, Prelude, played teneramente or tenderly. Bass and high reaching notes at the higher end of the piano keyboard. These sort of quivering figures are heard again in the modal figures in the high end, all pinned down by a pedal bass. The right hand has an improvised quality, but reaches up into higher areas of the mode as the movement goes on. At 2 minutes and 30 seconds is an almost romantic arpeggiated chord leading to the end of the movement, and it connects to a fugue. Now, the fugue is marked molto serioso, and we actually hear the first line of the fugue at the end of the previous track. It's laid out in a square eighth note rhythm, and that's a big change of this album because it's all been sort of wavering, shaking figures so far. It's a welcome change to the floating quality of the works we've heard since the beginning of the album. I'm going to sample this and I'm going to have to fade this up. So these modal lines now have polyphony in them and a steady rhythm as opposed to the really fluttering rhythm that they had in the other pieces. There's some pleasant harmonies that ring out at times. I heard a surprising open fifth after the minute and 30-second mark. You get a lot of those in modal works because the open fifth doesn't make it major or minor. It just sort of leaves it nondescript. At 2 minutes and 13 seconds, the bass takes on a thundering octave quality. The fugal form of the work makes this interesting to my ear. It's actually got quite a lot of variety to it, including changes of mood. At the 4th minute, there's actually some activity in the left hand that provides a harmonic bed for the lines in the right hand. Track 6 is marked Jor and Jala. The piece continues without pause into this movement, which is no longer a fugue. Jor and Jala are parts of a raga. Jor comes after the improvisatory alap, so it's the part where the tabla first come in. And Jala is the rhythmic section with the steady rhythm with the tabla that ends the rag. This gets pretty loud. I'm going to sample this from when it really starts going. And we get that nice exposition of the modal, scale at the very end of that sample. I guess we're hearing Koskinen's interpretation of a jala in this piece, and it's pretty involved. The piece just sort of fades there. Track 7 through 8, Fuga Libera, starts with a prelude to be played con grazia, or with grace, and this starts out prettily with modal melodic material shaped much like the earlier music we've heard. It's got a morning sunrise quality to it. I find it gentle and inviting, and I'd like to sample this one. This has sort of an alap quality to it. And one of the wonderful things about the alap in an Indian rag, that's the solo part that's played by the solo instrument right at the beginning, is that he has a set of pitches that he has to introduce. And usually they'll start with like 2 of them or 3 of them, and then gradually another one will be introduced. And it's always a bit of a surprise because it's not a Western scale. So it's sort of a tone that you're not really expecting. And they just keep coming until you have the entire scale. And that's when the tabla finally come in. We're getting a bit of that quality here, where the beginning is sort of limited, and then gradually newer tones are added, and they're not in a major or minor scale, so your ear always just kind of perks up with each new tone. Anyway, I find that particular movement gentle and inviting. Since the right-hand material has become familiar through the similarity of the modal figures used in these pieces, I find myself being drawn to the harmony in the left hand, and I'm rather enjoying the harmony choice as the modal melody plays. This is a pleasant movement, one I'd like to revisit. Track 8 is a fugue, and it's marked allegro, and it's interesting to hear such a modal melody put through the fugal form. Listen to the opening. We get the sunny modal opening, and the fugal voices change the harmony and give the melodic material some weight. The fugue reverts to a new single line at around the minute and 45-second mark, and a new fugal procedure begins. The upper melody gets to moving at a more excitable pace, with the lower voices following suit. The melody just pauses on a harmony, then quickly resolves. These two movements are my favorite pieces on the album, really. I thought they were really attractive. Tracks 9 through 11, Triamonia. The first movement is a canon, although I couldn't really pull out the canon figures. Well, I could. It was in the upper voices only, I think. It's marked serioso. A hesitant theme acts as the canon theme. I hear it repeated in the middle voice, but not in the bass, though the bass picks up sections of it at times. Some appealing block harmonies momentarily appear at 1 minute and 45 seconds. This is a very pretty flourish to end the movement. Track 10, the second movement, Fugetta, marked deciso. The fugue has a hardness to its line. And the lines are being played so fast that you can't really tell if it's a fugue or not. But there, you know how strict it is or not strict. It becomes uplifting as it goes, as you heard. But the piece itself sounds difficult to play with all of its quickly moving voices. A more spacious theme appears just after the minute mark. There's an appealing set of harmonies at the end, and the movement goes right into the finale, which is marked molto risoluto. This is track 11. There are lots of shaking motifs in this. I think the left hand would be simulating the constant rhythm of the tabla, though it doesn't imitate the percussiveness of the instrument. The music really hits some high rumbling volume as it goes, with the voices all rattling out of the piano. Again, the sound suddenly clears up, and we hear two ending chords. I'd like to play the end of this so you can get a sense of just the volume that is reached here. Very pretty and satisfying ending chords in that. Track 12 and 13, Fantasia in Yaman. Yaman is the name of a raga, which, like all ragas, uses a specific set of pitches. It's a basic raga, often among the first taught to students. Track 12, marked Dolce Cantabile, starts like a romantic piano piece with its thoughtful pauses and longer phrasing. The only difference is that it uses the pitches of the raga Yaman. Let's hear it. The Indian scale is well manipulated here to give this work the feel of a Western piece, but we can nevertheless hear its modal character clearly, including some open fifth chords at around the 1 minute and 30-second mark. The movement goes on for 5 minutes, and after a while it sounds like it's simply pacing back and forth over the same terrain. There's some appealing imitations of the melodic line in the two voices. At 4 minutes there's a full stop to the music. After that pause, some meditative lines are heard in the lower voice, playing solo without harmony. Track 13, Teneramente, and in parentheses we have for elk. This continues without a pause, but with a shift into warmer phrasing and harmony. It sounds affectionate. It's probably a dedication to Elk, this person that is in the parentheses there. Let's hear a sample of it. There's a catchy, repetitive pop tune quality to this particular movement that I found really appealing. And I'd sample this along with the Fuga Libera tracks, which are 7 and 8. The right-hand figuration speeds up into trills and then lets go into further rungs of the modal scale as the piece goes on. Tracks 14 through 17, the final piece on the album, Fuga Seria. The first movement, track 14, is a prelude. It starts with 2 notes in harmony and quickly goes into modal phrases in the high end. That opening theme is repeated with more activity in the bass, played in the middle of the keyboard. I like the overall sound. The work sort of creeps towards its end via short phrases, followed by chords. The second movement, track 15, is a fugue. The fugue's theme is modal and pleasing to the ear. I like the sound of the counterpoint in this piece. Let's hear it get going. And it's a pretty brief movement, so I better get out of it there. Track 16, the third movement, is an interlude, and the interlude is actually longer than the fugue. It's spacious and on the slow side, yet the right-hand figures remain active. Toward the end, we'll hear octaves in the left hand, and the movement gains energy only to dissipate and lean into the final movement, which is marked Allegro risoluto, track 17. This is rhythmically active and has a continuous figure in the right hand. There's contrapuntal material in the inner voices too. Let's sample the opening. You know, it's really hard to believe that there's a Finnish person composing all of this. It's a pretty complex, virtuosic movement with the material keeping up its rhythm. Inner voices are constantly moving. There are impressively taken repeated notes in the first minute. The various lines form a density that acts as a wall of sound. This reaches its peak via a crescendo in the fourth minute that has the individual notes rattling out of the piano. We've heard this earlier. Characteristically with Koskinen, as we know by now, the activity suddenly stops and the sound is allowed to dissolve, ending the piece and the album. So this album itself is enjoyable. Modes are wonderful balm to the ears, and I enjoyed hearing all of these pieces. But it left me wondering about the compositions themselves in a sort of philosophical way. By composing these works on paper for others to perform, Koskinen is using stone in a sense. Yet this music sounds impermanent, and I'm sure that's his intention. What I mean is it doesn't sound like a statement of the ego, like someone commenting on the time and space that he occupies, which is what most Western classical music does. I liked all of the music on this album. I enjoyed listening to it. It made me feel good. But after some time, it started sounding kind of samey. At the end, I didn't remember any of it. Just an overall image of modal figures remained. Which is fine, I guess. I can listen to it again and again, and it's great to have it available on a recording. You live in the moment that you hear the sounds, which is good. It takes us away from the everyday. But I think you only take away phrase shapes or certain techniques used, like the trilling giving rise to new tones. You take away a vague memory of how reassured it made you feel, without taking away the reassurance itself. I'll say this, though. I thought Joonas Ahonen gave these works their best possible performance. Joonas Ahonen gave these works their best possible performance at the piano on this album. He's totally committed and gets the spiritual quality built into the works up to the surface with his playing.
This was very interesting, starting with reading the notes about Koskinen's musical vision and the forming of his concept from his early listening to jazz, blues, a lot about Jimi Hendrix, and then his investigation and study of Indian music. The fusing of classical forms with modal-based music is very interesting and unusual, and the Asian flavor comes through on this recording, sometimes with just a touch of the blues. Ahonen puts in a dynamic performance, as you said, mixing subtleties and forceful climaxes. I was ready for some 2/5 changes and cadences again after about an hour straight of modal adventures, but I did enjoy it a lot. It was very unique.
You know, it's an album, I don't know how I sounded like summing it up, but it is an album that I kind of want to have, just to be able to play it. It's really pleasant. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
In that sense. I don't know. It just didn't stick, though. It's a really slippery album. It's sort of hard to describe. Well,
it's putting together things that we don't normally hear in the same space. And so, when you're hearing this fugue that doesn't have any cadences, it's kind of strange. But at the same time, it was intriguing.
Yeah, you're not hearing any major or minor intervals either, because he keeps the fifths open and things like that. Doesn't want any sense of key. Yeah.
Definitely worth listening to, though.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very
open
different.
Your mind. Yeah.
Let's say that.
All right, 2/5s and cadences we will get over on the jazz side tonight.
We sure will.
We're going to start out in Italy because there's just so much good jazz coming out of Italy. I could just find a whole program every week almost of that.
Yeah, I really wish more people in the United States would notice that, too. There's some really fantastic music there.
And here's a musician we haven't heard yet on the podcast, saxophonist Gianluca Caporale and his quartet. His new recording, Orizzonti, or Horizon, and this is on a label we've heard from before, the Emme Produzioni Musicali label, came out July 10th. On this recording, we've got Gianluca Caporale tenor sax, soprano sax, and all original compositions, Luca Bulgarelli on bass, Glauco Di Sabatino on drums, and Roberto Tarenzi on piano. Also, Fabio Zeppatella on guitar, who we have heard before, back in episode 144, Troubled Times, Remembered Times. It's from last year, and we heard his recording, Jazz Masters. And on the last track of the recording, we've got some horns. Alessandro Di Bonaventura on trumpet, and Sabatino Di Donatantonio on trombone.
Boy, all these names could have come from the neighborhood I grew up in Brooklyn.
Our leader here, Gianluca Caporale, was born in Teramo in 1974, graduating from conservatories, first studying clarinet and then saxophones and jazz. He studied and played with jazz musicians such as Paolo Fresu, Enrico Rava, Tommaso Lama, and Enrico Piranunzi. He's also taught jazz clarinet and saxophone at several conservatories in Italy. All the information I could find about this album is in Italian. And here's Caporale's little quote about this recording. Orizzonti contains my emotions, my experiences, and my reflections on various themes of life. In this album, there are more rhythmic songs alternating with emotional ballads that talk about love, hope, pain, and personal growth. I hope that listening to this record can bring you a moment of joy, comfort, or reflection, and thanks go to everyone who has supported me on this journey, and I hope you can appreciate the music I have created. And I think we will.
Yeah.
The recording starts out with NYC, New York City, Mike.
Right.
And I believe this was inspired by a trip to New York The notes say it gets started with an ominous ostinato of bass and black piano keys for an 8-measure intro. The minor melody is a repeating 24-measure construction like an ABB form. In the first section, sax and guitar have a riff over the ostinato, and then the field changes up for the next 16 measures. After that, it goes around again. The ostinato is back to set up Caporale's solo. Let's hear it get started.
After that Koskinen album, those open fifths in the bass just jump out at me. I'm just hearing them all the time now.
Yeah, they're right there. Well, things switch up to an energetic swing under Caporale's solo, and he digs in with an edgy tone over the shifting modal harmonies. Let's get a sense of his playing on this tune and check out his solo. Zeppetella coming in to follow up with a guitar solo. He's got a dark tone and a lot of rhythmic variety in his lines. And Terenzi gets a piano solo with snappy lines and a punchy left hand doing a lot of independent things. The ominous intro notes bring back one final round of the melody to finish it. Really good energy to start the recording. Track 2, Notte Infinita, Endless Night. The opening is amorphous and mysterious like the night, with ringing piano, meandering bass, guitar swells, and drum decoration. That comes to a pause after about 1 minute and 20 seconds, and Bulgarelli gets things restarted with a bass ostinato for 8 measures and gets joined by piano and drums for another round. Caporale's on soprano sax for this tune and works a 32-measure melody together with Zeppetella's guitar that has more changes in the second half. Let's hear it from the reset with the bass. After the melody, Caporale continues on with the soprano sax solo. He starts out relaxed and legato, but gets into some snappy double-time lines, soaring up high. Let's hear a little bit of his soprano sax playing. And from there it's back to the melody and a final slowed down coda section. Track 3 is Blues for Joshua, and that's tenor saxophonist Joshua Redman. This is a fun tune. Bulgarelli gets it going with a loping bass figure on the 8-measure intro. It's a 16-measure bluesy melody with some nice features like the triplet figures in the 5th measure. I like how the sax, guitar, and piano all join up together from the 9th measure. Let's take a listen to the beginning. Caporale's up for a tenor sax solo first. Midway, Bulgarelli switches up from rhythmic figures to a chugging walk. Caporale has a fun bluesy effortlessness in his lines. Let's check out Zeppatella's guitar solo on this tune. Agility and bluesy ideas. Terenzi is up next with a playful piano solo and some fun rising lines in there with harmonic meandering. They take it through the melody once more with some final phrase repeats to finish it out. Track 4 is the title track, Orizzonti, a 5/4 meter tune here. There's a 4-measure intro with a bass and piano left-hand ostinato to set the rhythmic feel. Caporale and Zeppatella work the riffy melody together. It's 36 measures in an A-B form. The B sections modulate on the same riff idea, and then there's a final 4 measures of the A idea. Let's hear it get going. The final measures include a break into a piano solo for Terenzi, and let's hear some of his playing on this tune. He's bubbling with ideas there, but a nice smooth execution. Caporale there follows on tenor next, with Zeppetella swelling up chord tones underneath before he gets the final solo. They work it through the melody once more and extend it with some of the main phrase for Di Sabatino to work up some drum energy underneath it to the end. Track 5, Song for My Sons. Back to the soprano sax for this 6/8 tune. There's an 8-measure intro section with a repeating sax and guitar line. The structure is unique with a 9-measure section that gets stuck on a repeating sax figure. That section repeats, and then there's a 4-measure contrasting section, and finally 4 measures of the original melody line idea. Sax, guitar, and piano vary the interplay as it goes along. Let's hear the intro and the first section. Bulgarelli lifts out of the last section of the melody into a bass solo, so let's hear some of his playing on this tune. Clear attack and really ringing bass tone. From there, they play the 9-measure melody section and final sections to end it. Track 6, L'arcobaleno, which I think means the rainbow. And this has a sunny pop song atmosphere to it. Actually, it's a thoroughly composed tune with no improvised solos. Piano, bass, and drums get it going with an 8-measure intro, and Zeppetella gets the main melody on guitar, which has 14-measure sections with Caporale joining in on the last phrase. Let's hear it get going. that section goes around again there, as you hear, lifting into a sax section for Caporale, and then lines are worked together by sax and guitar for the rest of the tune. Track 7, The Soul Dreamer, a 6/8 tune with Caporale on soprano sax again. The intro has a 4-measure bass and left-hand piano line that repeats with a sax and guitar line laid on top into a final 2-measure connection into the main tune. The melody has nice interplay between sax and guitar. Let's check it out. Overall, it's basically an AABA 32-measure structure, but the final section is a little different and more animated and ends with the 2-measure tag from the intro. Caporale solos first, showing a sense of agility in his lines with tricky figures and intervals, and Terenzi has an animated piano solo too that gets a bit rambunctious. Let's check that out on this tune. Back to the melody from there with an extended ending section. The recording ends up with track 8, Dreaming. Alessandro de Bonaventura on trumpet and Sabatino di Donatantonio on trombone join in for this happy tune with a Latin feel. The horns are right in from the 8-measure intro. The melody builds in sections, first with a chiming piano section, then guitar and horns together, and a short lifting transition that brings the trumpet out on top. We can get about that far with a minute sample. Continues on into a guitar solo from Zeppatella. Caporale gets a solo too, so let's hear him work it up to a climax on this tune. later section of the melody arrangement that we heard before, working to a punctuated ending. Like most of the Italian jazz recordings we've heard on the podcast, this one has a sunny atmosphere and lots of positive energy. A lot of that comes from Caporale's original compositions that have a pop melodic sensibility and a variety of rhythmic feels and meters. Caporale has a full-toned tenor and smooth soprano sax sound with agile and expressive improvised solos. Zeppatella's warm guitar tone is appealing with creative solos as well. I enjoyed Terenzi's adventurous piano solos too, and he locks in for a tight rhythm section with Bulgarelli and Di Sabatino propelling everything along with a lot of rhythm. This one should put you in a good mood.
Yeah, you mentioned Terenzi. When he plays the piano, he often has those like sort of harsh harmonies kind of thrown in, and I really liked that. It really drew my ear. There's a lot of that sort of thing, even in the soloing, where you'll have like a line that sort of contrasts a bit, but not really that much with the rhythmic pattern that's going on beneath it. And it just really kind of appealed to me in a lot of those ways. It's a pretty classy album, lively at times, tuneful on slower tracks. Okay, we always have great melodic playing when we have Italian players. Caporale likes a good theme and pursues quite a few styles throughout the album, ranging from fast, lively swing to an uplifting bluesy feel and even more popular themes. I thought Zeppatella contrasted with him and with his smooth tone, mellifluous lines, very melodic. It's an attractive album. The other players were all great too.
Yeah.
I liked all the soloing on this record.
Yeah, it was very enthusiastic. They sound like they were having a good time. And as I say, I almost never find a jazz recording from Italy that I don't like instantly. So
yeah, right. They have a real infectiousness to them. Yeah.
Yeah. Are we going to come back to the U.S. for this next recording? Drummer Louis Hayes. Artform Revisited on Savant. This came out July 5th. At 87 years old, Detroit native Louis Hayes is still going strong. Wow. He started playing on the New York jazz scene at the age of 19 in 1956, joining Horace Silver and then later Cannonball Adderley in 1959. He also played with Oscar Peterson, Dexter Gordon, Grant Green, Kenny Burrell, Cedar Walton, Sonny Rollins, John Coltrane, McCoy Tyner, Freddie Hubbard, and Woody Shaw. We heard his 2022 release, Crisis, in episode 45, Symbols of Civilization. He had another release last year, Exactly Right, as well, and all three of these have essentially the same lineup. And that's Louis Hayes on drums, Abraham Burton, tenor saxophone, who would be 53 years old, Steve Nelson on vibraphone, he's 69, a pianist we really like, David Hazeltine, 65 years old, and Desron Douglas, bass, 43 years old. So we've got a few different generations of jazz musicians in here under Louis Hayes' leadership. And the recording is a bunch of jazz compositions that inspired Louis Hayes as he was coming up as a player. And we're going to get some music from bebop and beyond on this recording, starting out with a Dizzy Gillespie tune, Tour de Force, which goes back to 1955 from the album of the same name. This is basically a contrafact of the tune Jeepers Creepers by Harry Warren, also known as Salvatore Antonio Guaragna, as we found out a few weeks ago. It's a 32-measure AABA tune. Like Dizzy's tune and arrangement, it's got a 3-measure intro and an ending 8-measure section, here split between sax and vibes over drums, then bass, and then the 3-measure intro lick into a break for Nelson to get started on a vibes solo. Vibes and sax work the melody together, locking in with bass. Hayes' cymbals are crystal clear and his fills are super tight. Let's hear this album get going. Nelson is energetic and melodic in his improvisations with relaxed phrasing. Burton follows with lots of bluesy phrases, low honks, and a good sense of space in his lines. Let's check him out on this tune. Hazeltine and Douglas get solos too, and everyone is back from the B section of the melody to wrap it up. Track 2 is Milestones by pianist John Lewis, written for Miles Davis in 1947 and recorded that year with the Miles Davis All-Stars, including Charlie Parker. This is not to be confused with Miles's own composition from the Milestones album, recorded 10 years later. A nice easy sense of swing on this one. It's another AABA 32-measure tune with an 8-measure introduction. Sax and vibes together on the melody again, and Burton is up first for a solo. Let's hear it get going. Hazeltine has a solo with some speedy runs and a nice bounce in this tune. Well, let's hear the piano solo on this one. Nelson's got a great swing feel in his vibes solo on this one. Once more through the melody after his solo finishes this one up in just over 4 minutes. Track 3, Charlie Parker's My Little Suede Shoes. This goes back to a recording either 1952 or 1953. Charlie Parker plays south of the border. This tune is probably inspired by 2 French songs, Pedro Gomez, the melody of the A section, and La Petite Sirène Noire for the rest of the melody. It has kind of a cute calypso feel to it, and Hayes gets to start it out with some toms and clicks, the rhythm section building it up before the AABA melody. Let's check it out. Solos first on piano there, as you hear, and Burton follows with a gutsy toned tenor solo. Nelson's vibe solo on this one has an interesting start of phrases that he gets to build on, and Hayes takes his first drum solo on the recording here, so let's check it out. And back to the happy melody from there, and as you should know by now, this recording exudes positive swinging energy. Track 4, You're Looking at Me. This is a lovely ballad that hasn't been recorded that much by American actor, jazz pianist, singer, and songwriter Bobby Troup. Now he's better known for composing Route 66, and also, Mike, for his role as Dr. Joe Early with his wife Julie London in the television program Emergency from the 1970s. Remember that?
Oh, wow, with the fire engines, yeah.
Yeah, Randolph Mantooth. I remember watching that when I was a kid.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, anyway, as you'll hear, this is a lovely tune, and it hasn't been recorded all that often. Nelson sits out on this one. It's a good showcase for Burton's softer side. Let's hear his rubato start with piano underneath into Hayes' brushwork when he and Douglas join in. Lovely sax tone there, and I want to hear a little bit more of it. That ending phrase. Hazeltine has a gentle piano solo next, and Burton is back to finish out the melody with a lot of feeling. Track 5, Ruby. This seems to be a new composition by Louis Hayes. It's a swinging minor 32-measure AABA tune with a little brighter twist and walking bass on the B section, Nelson is back to work the melody on Vibes with Burton. Let's check this melody out. Douglas is up first with a bass solo there. Burton gets another gutsy tenor sax solo, ending up with some double time lines. Let's check in on Nelson on this tune with a bluesy vibes solo with a lot of trills and tremolos. Gets a go on piano as well before a final run through the melody. Track 6 is Charlie Parker's Cheryl, recorded in 1949 and released on 1951's Broadcast Performances. It's a beboppy 12-bar blues tune with a pickup line into the melody. Let's check it out into Burton's solo. Nelson and Hazeltine get solos too. Hazeltine working in a little quote of Irish washerwoman that's kind of cute. The three soloists trade some fours with Hayes before getting back to the melody one last time. Track 7, Ray's Idea by Ray Brown and Gil Fuller. This was recorded by Dizzy Gillespie and his orchestra in 1947 and again by Miles Davis in 1953 on his Blue Note release Volume 2. It's a happy swinging tune. Nelson's vibes ring out some chords on the 8-measure intro. It's a 32-measure AABA tune. The rising syncopated bass and piano line underneath the A sections is a nice touch. Let's hear it. Nelson going first on a vibe solo there. Burton and Hazeltine get solos on this one too. Track 8, A Flower is a Lovesome Thing, Billy Strayhorn composition, first recorded by Duke Ellington and his orchestra in 1946. Burton sits this one out and it becomes a feature for Nelson's vibes. He works up an intro with just the addition of Hayes' brushwork. Let's sample it from the main melody where Douglas and Hazeltine join in just before a minute. It's a dreamy melody, and Nelson's improvisations have a lot of nuanced dynamics. Let's check out a little bit more of his playing. It's back to the last section of the melody from there. Track 9, another Charlie Parker tune, Dewey Square, recorded by the Charlie Parker Quintet in 1947. This is a contrafact of George Gershwin's Oh Lady Be Good, an AABA 32-measure tune. Here, Burton gets to take the B section on his own while working the A section with Nelson. Burton gets the first solo, followed by Nelson and Hazeltine. And the recording ends up with a tune called G. This is a new composition by Louis Hayes and Desron Douglas. It's a slow blues with a 4-measure intro from Hazeltine. Nelson and Burton work the melody at the start, but it's all Burton from the 5th measure, continuing on into a solo. Let's check it out. Nelson will come back on those beginning measures of the melody as a transition into his own solo, and again to get Hazeltine started on his piano solo. Let's hear the piano solo to the end of this recording. Well, Louis Hayes is a living museum of post-bop jazz, but there's no dusty old fossils in here. His playing is energetic and lively, and he's a leader able to inspire different generations of musicians to bring out their best. Great solos here from Burton, Nelson, Hazeltine, and Douglas, too. The material is mostly classic jazz compositions going back to bebop, with several from Charlie Parker, but there are 2 new numbers and a neglected gem of a ballad as well. It all comes up still sounding fresh and creative.
Yeah, these old jazz musicians really have incredible energy, you know. Maybe they should run for president. Anyway, there are a lot of familiar compositions on this album, and they're played with an exuberant swinging style. And there's that word again, exuberant.
Exuberant.
I thought about it so often when listening to these recordings, and including that first classical one that we heard too. Louis Hayes, the drummer, is recorded up front, and during solos he'll inject these little accents or unexpected sounds that don't disturb the solo, but add a little something extra. And I really kind of enjoyed those when they came up. His presence is felt throughout the album, and it's a presence that swings like jazz from the past. I like the presence of the vibes and Steven Nelson's sound. Abraham Burton's sax is confident and sings out on solos, particularly in You're Looking at Me. That solo really kind of struck me too. He's always reaching for the skies in the faster tracks too. He wants to hit that high note. David Hazeltine, we like him a lot. Right? He has a great feel for the rhythm and a great sense of swing in his solos, and Desron Douglas holds the rhythm down and solos satisfyingly when he's in the spotlight. This is a straightforward swinging album by an elder statesman of jazz. It's great to hear Hayes in such good form, and this is another one of these recordings that I wouldn't mind having. I'm going to have to look for it now. Yeah, maybe even the other 2. I don't think I have any of his albums. I may have to pick up some of the older ones.
Let's just hope he just keeps popping out one every year like these. It's just great stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, on to another musician who we've heard before, pianist Misha Tsiganov and his recording on Crisscross Jazz, Painter of Dreams. This came out July 12th. Now, Misha Tsiganov played classical music from age 6 and later also played jazz in his native country of Russia, but he left there and arrived in the U.S. from St. Petersburg in 1991, already having 3 college degrees, including one from the prestigious Mussorgsky College of Music, and having played major concert halls in Russia, but he had to start from scratch in the U.S. He had been offered a scholarship to Berklee School of Music in Boston, but he didn't have enough money for all of his costs. Almost broke and in a new country with no work permit, he made a hard decision, and he played on the streets and subway stations in Boston. Eventually, he got enough money for Berklee, but he moved to New York after just 1 semester in 1993 to take a job, as he says, with a decent salary at a Russian restaurant. And he played Russian restaurants for 8 years, but not jazz, but restaurant repertoire. And then he finally went on to play with Chico Freeman and then Joe Chambers.
I wonder if there's a fake book called Restaurant Repertoire, you know?
He had his first album as a leader in 2007, and this is his 5th recording for Crisscross Jazz. We heard him back in episode 48, Crafty Complications. That was his previous release, Misha's Wishes. And this is a different cast of musicians except for trumpeter Alex Sipiagin. So Misha Tsiganov here on piano, Fender Rhodes, and also Mini Moog on this recording.
Yeah.
We've got a stellar horn lineup. Chris Potter on tenor sax and soprano sax, Miguel Zenon on alto sax, Alex Sipiagin trumpet and flugelhorn, Jonathan Blake on drums, Matt Brewer on bass, and we've got a vocalist on here too, Histra Oosterwijk from the Netherlands. This was recorded in January 6, 2024 in Astoria, New York. Engineer Michael Marciano. He did the recording, editing, mixing, and mastering, and producer Jerry Teakins. Recording notes say, like its predecessor, Painter of Dreams features 2 highly reworked standards along with 6 recent melody-forward compositions to which Tsiganov applies his signature blend of radical reharmonization, mixed meters, shifting tempos, and changing keys. It also says Tsiganov expands beyond the saxophone, trumpet, piano, bass, drums format, scoring 5 of the 8 sections for 3 horns. I wanted a totally different color. While working on the repertoire, he drew on information accrued in arranging courses with Michael Mossman at Queens College, where he earned a master's in 2019. That opened the gate of big band music for me, Tsiganov says. And I also like this story from the end of the album notes. Quote, I'm extremely happy with this album. I didn't listen for 2 months so that I could forget it and then listen with fresh ears. I was in Italy with Alex driving back from a gig. He started playing the end of the tune April, and I exclaimed, what is this? I want this record. Where can I find it? Alex started laughing at me. I told Chris Potter the story of how I didn't recognize my own record, and he laughed and said, that's hysterical and a good sign, because the only time you can ever hear your own music objectively is if you don't know it's you. Interesting. I think all musicians know this feeling. Anyway, this recording has got a lot of elements to it. So let's jump in with track 1 called Elusive Dots. This is Tsiganov original. This tune stretches to almost 11 minutes, and there's a lot going on. I think I'll give you some mini samples to catch the different highlights of it. It opens with a lovely toned rubato tenor sax from Chris Potter over Tsiganov's Rhodes. Let's hear just a little bit of that. What great tone. After a minute, there's a pause, and Brewer gets things restarted with bass and gets joined by Blake and Tsiganov. Now let's check out some of these horn arrangements that he's worked out on this tune. Tricky stuff, and I lost track of the meter, but it seems to be in 7/8 at least some of the time. Potter gets a really muscular tenor solo, and then Tsiganov solos on Mini Moog, which sounds pretty cool. Let's take a listen to a little bit of that too. While the rhythmic push dissipates there for the end of his solo and restarts after a pause for Sipiagin to get a solo next with his usual dexterity and flights into the upper register. Zenon joins in before he finishes and takes over with an intense alto solo. The tricky horn melody arrangement is back to end the tune. Track 2, another Tsiganov original, April. This one clocks in at almost 11 minutes too. Tsiganov's on Rhodes again, and here Osterweck's vocalizations are part of the melody arrangement with the horns after the short intro. It sounds like changing meters here too. The main melody seems to switch between 4 and 3 beats. Let's hear it get started and check out Brewer's cool electric bass lines under everything that's going on. rhythm section transitions to a smooth tenor sax solo from Potter, and Tsiganov has a fleet Rhodes solo with great interaction from Blake. Cypriagan has a buttery-toned flugelhorn solo with agile darting lines. Zenon gets a solo too, with an interesting mix of articulation building up from short, choppier phrases. There's a backing horn arrangement behind him too. Ostervek is back for another vocal section, and then Tsiganov has intertwined the lines nicely in the arrangement. And then Zenon and Potter get to do some intense improvised trading. So let's sample some of that. Keep working it up into a frenzy to a final repeated synced lines joined by Ostervek. Track 3, Up Journey, another Tsiganov original. Brewer gets it going with a rhythmic repeated note bass idea. When the horns come in, the lines are on an upward journey that gives the impression of climbing and slipping back on a mountain slope at high speed. Potter is on soprano on this one. Let's hear the tune get going. Next is a contrasting section before we hear the previous section once again. Cypriagan solos first on trumpet, skillfully navigating the rapidly shifting chords and climbing up high, and Potter follows on soprano. This is his last tune on the recording, so let's check out his soprano solo on this one. Tsiganov has been playing Rhodes, but he switches over to acoustic piano for his solo on this one, with well-connected extended phrases of ideas that get horn backing lines. The horn melody sections from before return and get Zenon launched on a solo that really cries out and gets some horn action of upward lines to bring it to the end. Track 4 is the title track, Tsiganov's Painter of Dreams. It's a slower tune in 4. After an 8-measure intro, Cypriagan and Zenon have flowing harmonized horn lines that work up to Ostervek joining in with lyrics this time. Her voice really soars. Let's have a listen from where she joins in about a minute into the tune.
It all begins inside the mind, with colors side by side, to be or not to be, a dream to dream, a vision. It goes beyond what's in the heart, to take a vision, make it art, to be remembered. Within a passion, a vision grows, imagination the afterglow. Within a treasure of make-believe, reveals a painter of dreams to be. Within a passion, a vision grows, imagination the afterglow. Within a treasure of...
There's a vocalized section in unison with Tsiganov's mini moog and then an acoustic piano solo. Let's hear some of Sipyagin's flugelhorn on this one. Zenon follows with an alto solo where the groove changes up to a 6/8 feel. Osterweg is back with the lyrics, and then Zenon and Sipyagin get to trade improvisations, eventually joining in simultaneous playing before Osterweg is back for a final chorus of vocals. Track 5, Long Ago and Far Away. This is a song by Jerome Kern and Ira Gershwin from the 1944 Technicolor film musical Covergirl. It starred Rita Hayworth and Gene Kelly. This is a fun reimagination of this tune, with the melody alternating between a straight, even exposition, then switching to swing and back, and then really taking off on a fast swing before shifting down again. I'll let it play long so you can hear it all the way through the melody. Tsiganov is up for a very joyful Rhodes solo, so let's hear some of that on this tune as well. Zinon's alto solo on this one really burns up, navigating the rhythmic change-up sections from the melody arrangement. Scipiagan has a flugelhorn solo as well. They work through the melody arrangements again into a final vamping section with horn lines for Blake to do some speedy drum work around the kit. Track 6, back to Tsiganov's Originals, Sealy Street song. Osterbeck returns for this tune with lyrics. It starts out in 5/8 but changes up to a 6/8 feel in the second vocal section. Let's check it out. Zinon and Scipiagan both get solos. Then there are cool unison vocalized and flugelhorn lines alternating with piano sections. That's pretty cool, so let's check that out. Tsiganov continues on until Osterbeck is back with more vocals and a final section with the horns. Track 7, Tsiganov Original Chain of Events. This one has a funky feel to it. It's got a 10-beat rhythm, kind of 4+6, at least to start out. Check it out. Section, it seems to pick up an extra beat in the phrases. Scipiagan solos first, then Tsiganov on Rhodes. Let's hear some of Zinon's solo on this tune. Tsiganov has some of the mini moog mixed in with the Rhodes there backing Zenon, and it gets into a return of the horn melody that gets broken up with some drum breaks for Blake. And the recording's going to end up with George Gershwin's I Love You, Porgy. This is a very cool reimagination and arrangement. It's chilled out, but with a dose of funkiness from Brewer's electric bass. The intro works off from repeating the opening melody phrase, starting on the second beat, getting the horns in on the melody with some cool reharmonization. Let's hear some of that. As the arrangement goes along, Tsiganov adds in some mini moog for atmosphere. Let's hear a bit of that sound into a bass solo from Brewer. Spiagin and Zenon get solos before another horn arrangement section back into the melody, and then it chills on a vamping groove for some mini moog fun from Tsiganov with backing horn lines to the end. This is a long recording at 1 hour and 13 minutes because there's so much going on. Tsiganov's original compositions are rhythmically and harmonically complex with lots of changes and development. I didn't even talk about structures much just to focus on the highlights in each tune. It's hard music to explain, but don't let that complexity scare you because it's easy to enjoy. In fact, when I was listening to it today, taking some notes, Mrs. Russ said, "I like this. Let's listen to it again sometime at night." And that doesn't always happen with music on the podcast. On top of Tsiganov's captivating compositions, we get a Jerome Kern and Gershwin standard reinvented, and we get to check out his horn arranging skills now with 3 of the top horn players out there today, Chris Potter, Miguel Zenon, and Alex Sipiagin, who all have incredible solos throughout the recording. That would be more than enough for any record, but then we get Osterweck's vocals woven into the arrangements and 2 tunes with lyrics. Tsiganov himself switches it up between piano, Rhodes, and the mini moog with fine solos on all 3. We're fans of Jonathan Blake's drumming, and he makes all the rhythmic complexity and changing grooves sound easy and smooth. My ear was constantly drawn to Brewer's electric bass work throughout the recording, with great lines and his locking in with Blake. This is a recording that will sustain repeated listenings with new discoveries. I've found something new to appreciate every time I've listened to it this week.
Yeah, I guess it does have sort of a romantic feel to it. I haven't thought of that. I think the Fender Rhodes does that, really. You know, he kind of puts you in that 1970s sort of, or 1980s
Right.
kind of space, Whitney Houston and all those pop music tracks. Anyway, it's an album of adult music all-stars. We love all these guys, and here they are. Really given a lot of space, too, to show their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I was rather delighted with the mini Moog solos on this album.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, you'd think the sound would be dated, but somehow it fits well here. And good for Tsiganov for figuring out solos to put this instrument in a good modern light. Okay, It doesn't really take us back into the past at all. He plays the Rhodes throughout, and it gives it a groovier vibe than those 1980s pop tunes that I had mentioned earlier. He's an inventive player with a good ear for what will work in a given timbre, and I enjoyed hearing him play, because he used the Fender Rhodes really well. I just didn't think this sounded like an ordinary, use of the Fender Rhodes. The tracks themselves, like you said, are interestingly structured, with solos followed by a repeat of the theme, which are then followed by improvised duets sometimes. It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The tracks are long, leave a lot of room for the soloists to build their ideas, and with musicians like, you mentioned before, Alex Ipiaga, Miguel Zenon, Chris Potter, those ideas become interesting and complex. Overall, the album is more on the laid-back side of mid-tempo, probably why Mrs. Russ liked it so much. Or that's just the Fender Rhodes making me feel that way. They're upbeat tracks when the soloists play out. It's a good listen with the soloists really drawing the interest during their caught-in-the-building process solos. I really liked that.
Yeah, inventive.
Yeah. A lot on this, a lot of invention going on in a lot of different spaces, not just the solos.
Can't wait to see what he does next. And I'd like to, if he's into this arranging now, I'd like to hear what he could do with a larger ensemble, an octet or something, tentet, or maybe even big band in the future. That would be cool. Yeah.
And he has an ear for timbre, like I mentioned. There's something about even the mini Moog not making it sound like something from a 1950s sci-fi movie. It didn't. It was kind of had a lot more than that going for it. The Moog was from the 60s, right? That's a 60s instrument.
I believe so, yeah. When it was first used a lot. Yeah. Anyway, Misha Tsiganov, looking forward to whatever you come up with next. And that wraps it up for episode 174 of Adult Music. 1,006 recordings now officially logged in. And thanks as always to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. We'll be back again with episode 175 next week. What do we have on the menu for classical next week, Mike?
Classical music, we have a debut album by the pianist Mishka Rushdie Momen. And it's an album called Reformation. It's got keyboard works by Baroque and Renaissance era composers William Byrd, Orlando Gibbons, John Bull, and Jan Peterzoon Zwielinck. We never hear these played on the piano. Usually they're sort of on the lute or the harpsichord, so this should be interesting. We've also finally got some anniversary recognition here in a recording by Schoenberg and Fauré. They're separate compositions of Pelléas and Melisande. Now, Schoenberg this year is celebrating the 150th anniversary of his birth, and it's Fauré's, the 100th anniversary of Fauré's death. Right. I hope I got that right. Yeah, 150 years since Schoenberg was born. So they're both on the same album. So I figured, hey, we can knock these two out right away. And for those of you who get nervous at the name Schoenberg, this composition comes from his early romantic years. I think you'll enjoy it.
Pre-12 tone?
No 12 tone in this one. And then the contemporary composers are John Corigliano, the American composer, Mr. Tambourine Man, 7 poems of Bob Dylan. I'm kind of curious to hear what he's going to do with those. And Vincent Ho, Canadian composer, his piece Griffin Realms for piano's trio. So curious to hear those.
Right, on the jazz side, I've got all new recordings that just came out this Friday. Starting out with one that I just found today. Kind of a crossover. We heard some really interesting classically based jazz recordings in the last year. And we've got another one here with a composer who we both are intrigued by, Mompo. And this is going to be Mompo Revisited, Intimate Impressions by a Spanish pianist, Luis Capdevila. And I need to find out a little bit more about the compositions and what his inspirations are here. Hopefully I can get some information during the week. Also, great pianist Shelley Berg with his new recording Allegria. That's a lot of fun. I've been listening to that since it came out, just a couple of days. And another one I've already been listening to that I'm excited about, on Positone, pianist Luther Allison. So 3 great jazz piano recordings. I think you're going to like all of them. As always, if you want to get started listening along with us during the week, I'll have these up in a playlist on Deezer, and you can start listening to them early. There'll be a link to them as well on our Facebook page, so come over and check us out there. Any final words before we close out, Mike?
Yeah, I should be saying this more often. I have a novel called Extreme Music available on Amazon, and being that it's beach season, if you're looking for a book to read, why not buy a copy of my book and read it, and you'd be helping me out a lot, okay? It's just been sitting there on Amazon not selling, so I just want to give it a plug. Extreme Music by Michael Vizzuto. Check it out.
Yeah, I read it, and I liked it, and I think any musicians or anyone who has been to music school will appreciate the humor in Mike's novel. I should mention
it's a novel, it's a little crazy, which, like me, so it's perfect, yeah.
Goes along with adult music really well.
Perfect for the beach, yeah. Great for Christmas, too, by the way, but we'll get to that.
So until next week with episode 175, thanks for staying with us. Keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.